If you're looking to fit that set of larger wheels and tires and create a better stance for your 2020 or newer JT Gladiator, this Teraflex 3.5-inch performance spacer lift kit will be a great way to do it. Now this will be an awesome choice for the JT owner who wants a decent amount of lift to fit up to a 35 on a Sport or an Overland model and a 37-inch tire on a Rubicon model to make the Jeep more capable off-road. I would like to note that if you are installing 37s with this lift kit on a Sport model, that you will need to remove the front factory splash guards in order to have no rubbing. Now this kit will also just be a great choice if you're looking for a minimal way to get 3.5 inches for a better stance and a more aggressive aesthetic. Now this kit will give you everything that you need to get that height while allowing you to choose the rest of your components that you want to pair with this, which makes it great if you're looking to tailor your suspension to your personal preference. Now, as it says in the name, this will be a spacer lift, which will give you that 3.5 inches of lift, but do keep in mind that you will need to pair this with additional components to correct the suspension geometry, including the front lower control arms, or you can add brackets, a front track bar that most likely is adjustable, and shocks. Now this kit will include spacers for the front because it is a solid axle. They are going to measure true to 3.5 inches. On the rear to correct that rake and not give you 3.5 inches in the rear, they are going to be 1.5 inches true to size. Now this kit will also include bump stop extensions that are tailored to the specific tire package or the tire size that you are going to put on your specific model. So I would keep an eye on those instructions when you get to that point. You're going to get strike pads, front and rear sway bar end links, as well as a track bar relocation bracket. Now the spacers, the bump stop extensions for the front, and the strike pads will be made of a heavy-duty plastic material which will remain durable while not having the ability to rust or corrode like others may. Now the rear bump stop extensions are made of a billet aluminum construction with a nice black anodized finish on top, which will be very durable, and with that anodized finish it is going to resist any corrosion on those as well. Now the front and rear sway bar end links will also have a durable construction with reinforced handling and factory style bushings for an OE fit. Now this kit will come in at right around the $500 mark, making it pretty affordable compared to other kits. Now the rule of thumb is that the more components that a kit comes with and the more in-depth that it is, it's going to usually be set at a more premium price point. Now again, this will only include the spacers and minimal components, keeping it affordable and allowing you to customize it and tune your suspension to your own needs without being locked into a full kit. Now it also kind of allows you to build the Jeep over time, and with this kit you'll get a lot of longevity from the quality in the components. Now install will be a 3 out of 3 wrenches on the difficulty meter, so I would recommend some mechanical experience for this, and it should take you about 6 hours to get the job done with the right tools. Now at this point we can head over to our shop and check out a detailed breakdown of the install and what that looks like step by step. So that's going to wrap it up for me. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Tools required for this install include a couple different size impact guns, an air gun, a drill, a 1/2 inch drill bit, a couple extensions, an electric ratchet, a hand ratchet, a hammer, a swivel adapter, 13, 14, 15, 18, and 19 millimeter wrenches, 10, 14, 18, 19, and 21 millimeter ratcheting wrenches, a marker, a center punch, a flathead screwdriver, a clip remover tool, the included nut holding tool, a caliper hanger, a 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 21 millimeter sockets, and a 6 millimeter Allen bit. What's up guys? Today we're installing a lift kit on our Jeep. Now before we get down to it, it is important to note that to install this kit, you're either going to have to buy some extended shocks or shock extension brackets, both of which we have on the site. So let's get started. So our first step is to disconnect our bolt holding in our track bar on the passenger side. It's going to be a 21 millimeter bolt. It's right below our sway bar here. We have a tab with a welded nut on the back that's going to grab so we don't have to get a wrench on the back side. We'll just get our 21 millimeter socket on the front and remove our bolt. So now our next step is to remove our sway bar end link. We have an 18 millimeter bolt on the bottom and an 18 millimeter nut on the top. Now I'm going to be using an 18mm ratcheting wrench for the bottom since there's not enough room for a gun. And then we can also remove our tab with our welded nut. And then for the top, we can just grab an 18mm socket on an impact gun to take that nut off. And then we can just pop our end link out and do the same thing for the other side's end link. So our next step is to disconnect our lower shock mount. We have an 18mm wrench we're going to put on our nut side and an 18mm ratcheting wrench for our bolt side. So next we can disconnect our lower shock mount. I'm grabbing an 18mm wrench for our nut side and an 18mm socket for our bolt side. And now we can go up to the top of our shock and disconnect our other bolt. It's going to be that same 18mm socket. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So next we can pop out these two clips as well as this nut that's holding on our bracket, holding our brake line. So I'll grab a clip remover tool to pop these two clips out. And then we can grab a 15mm socket to remove our nut on the bracket. So next we can pop out this push clip up here as well as our connector to our four-wheel drive actuator. So I'll get a clip remover tool for our top clip. And then we just need to pop out this little white tab and then press down on it to remove our connector. So I'm going to grab that clip tool just to pop that out. And then we can disconnect that. So now we can begin to lower our pole jack to free up enough space to pull our spring out. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now the first thing we're going to do is mark and drill our holes for our track bar relocation bracket. Now we're going to be drilling out this hole on the front side as well as this hole on the top on the back side. So we'll get our bracket pressed into place and then we can grab a center punch to punch our holes to get ready to drill them out. Now you might have to give your bracket a couple light taps with a hammer just to get it seated into place. So now once we have everything lined up, we can grab our center punch to punch out our holes. So now with our holes punched out, we can remove our bracket. I'm just going to get a pry bar in there. And now we can begin drilling our holes. I'm going to start with a 1/8 inch drill bit and work my way up to our 1/2 inch that we're going to finish with. And then we can do that same thing on top. And now we can work our way up, progressively getting bigger drill bits. And now we're ready to finally use our 1/2 inch drill bit. So we'll finish drilling out our holes here. So now we can reinstall our track bar bracket. Once again, we'll just give it a couple taps just to get it all lined up into place. And then on the front hole we drilled, we'll be installing our bolt with our nut. And then on that back hole we drilled, we're going to be installing this nut on an L bracket from the bottom side. So now that we have all of our hardware in place, we can tighten down our front bolt and nut with a 16mm socket and 16mm wrench. And then up top, since we have it fed into that L bracket, we can just tighten that down with a 16mm socket. So now we're ready to install our spacer block. Now we do have an optional additional spacer that you can add if you would like to. We're not going to be installing this piece. So then we can grab our rubber isolator and then pop that right back on with our spacer in place. So now we're ready to reinstall our factory spring. Now we are going to be adding these bump stop extensions to our bottom here. Now our main block is a 2-inch, and then you have the option to add up to 2 more 1/2 inches. We're just going to be installing our 2-inch bump stop spacer. So we can feed our spring up. We're going to slide this through the bottom since we're not going to be able to get it in there once our spring is installed. So now once we have our bump stop spacer installed, we are able to slide in those little 1/2-inch spacers if you would like to add those later on. Next we'll come down to our brake line bracket. We have a 10mm bolt that we can loosen up with a 10mm ratcheting wrench. And then we'll twist that the rest of the way out by hand. And then we can slide our bracket out of place. Next we can install our Allen head bolt through the top of our spacer and then drop that down into this little area. Then we can take the tool that comes in our kit, we'll put our nut in there, and then we can use that to raise it up, to line it up, so we don't have to get our fingers in there. And then on the top, we'll grab a 6mm Allen bit. And then we can feed our nut on the bottom and start to thread that in. Next we can reinstall that brake line bracket and reinstall our 10mm bolt. Tighten that up most of the way by hand. Then we can grab that 10mm ratcheting wrench to tighten that up. Now our next step is to install our shock extension brackets. Now these aren't included in the kit, but you can find them on the website. So we'll slide that on. We have a bolt that's going to go through. And then we have this crush sleeve that's going to go in the middle, and our bolt's going to thread through that. And then on the other side, we'll get a flat washer and a lock washer. Then on the bottom, we'll be using the smaller of our 2 bolts with a washer, and then another washer on the top side, and our locking nut. And then we can tighten down our bottom bolt using a 15mm socket and a 15mm wrench. And then for the bolt on our side, we'll use a 19mm wrench and a 19mm socket. And then once we have our extension bracket installed on this side, we can repeat the same process on the other side. Next, we can reinstall our 2 brake line brackets. So we'll rethread our factory 10mm bolt in our upper bracket and then tighten that down with a 10mm socket. And then we can pop our 2 clips back into place. And then coming to the bottom, we can reinstall our lower bracket. And we'll tighten that one down with a 15mm socket. And then next, we can reclip the clip and our harness connector for our 4-wheel drive. And then we'll push that white tab in to click it into place. So now we have our axle raised up a little bit so that we can install our shocks. So we'll get this into our upper mount first. And then we still have to raise our axle a little bit more just to get our holes to line up to get our bolt through. Then we can reinstall our factory lower bolt. And our nut on the other side. And then we can thread in our upper bolt as well. Then we'll grab an 18mm socket to tighten down our top bolt. And then on the bottom, we'll get an 18mm wrench on our nut side and an 18mm socket on our bolt side to tighten that one down. And then we can repeat the same process on the other side. Now we can reinstall our factory sway bar end link. Slide that through the top and get our nut on there. And then we can pull down on our sway bar to get it into that mount. And then on the bottom, we can reinstall our factory bolt as well as our nut that's welded to the tab. And then we can grab an 18mm ratcheting wrench to tighten down our bottom bolt. And then we can take an 18mm socket for a nut. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now moving on to the rear, we have to remove our shock. We've got a 21mm bolt and nut on the bottom as well as the top. So I'll grab a 21mm socket and a 21mm wrench to get these out. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now once we have our shock removed, our next step is to come up to our brake line bracket, remove this 10mm bolt, and pull our bracket out of the way. So our next step is to remove our sway bar end link. We have an 18mm nut on the bottom and an 18mm bolt on top. So we'll grab an 18mm socket for our top bolt. For our bottom ball joint, we're going to be using an 18mm ratcheting wrench with a 6mm Allen bit to prevent our ball joint from spinning. And then we'll grab our 18mm socket for our top bolt. And then we can do that same thing on the other side. So now we've lowered down our axle to get enough room to pull our spring out, so we can pull that out now. So our next step is to remove our brake caliper to relieve some of this tension on our lines. So I've got a caliper hanger I'm going to throw into this hole up here. And then we have two 10mm bolts that we can remove to remove our caliper. And then we can wiggle this out of place. And then we can hang that up on our caliper hanger. Then we can pop our ABS wire out of these little clips, because we do have a lot of slack on that one. And now once we have everything removed that we need to remove on this side, we can do that same thing on the other side. So now the first thing we're going to do is remove our bump stop to install our bump stop spacers. Now you can do this pretty easily by fitting a flathead screwdriver up in between the bump stop and the metal and just prying downward. So now we can install our bump stop spacers. We have a 1.5 inch with a 1/2 inch stacked on top. We have our bolt with a flat washer that's going to go through the bottom. Then we have a spacer for the top. That'll slide up through the hole. And then on the top we'll get another flat washer and our nut. And then we can grab a 17mm socket for our bolt side and a 15mm wrench for our nut side to tighten this down. And then we can pop our bump stop back in by wiggling that up. Next, we can install our lower bump stop spacer. So we'll throw our two bolts through the top. And then we have two nuts for the bottom. And then we can tighten those down using a 13mm socket and a 13mm wrench. Next, we can install our spring spacer. That's just gonna sit right on the bottom there. And then we can reinstall our factory spring. Now, once we have all of our spacers installed on one side, we can do that same thing on the other side and get ready to raise our axle up. So now we can reinstall our caliper as well as our brake line bracket and clip our two lines together. We'll reinstall those two 10mm bolts. And then we'll tighten those down with our 10mm socket. And then we'll tighten down our top bracket with a 10mm socket. Next, we can install our new sway bar end links. So the side of the ball joint is going to go into our sway bar. And then we can reinstall our factory 18mm bolt up top. And then we'll install the nut on the bottom that comes in our kit. And then we can tighten both down with an 18mm socket. And at this point, we can repeat those same steps on the other side. Now our next step is to reinstall our factory shocks. So we'll get our bolt through our upper mount first. Then we can get our nut on the back side. We'll get that threaded on a few threads. And then for our bottom mount, we're gonna have to go up a little higher on our pole jack. We can slide our bolt through, get our nut on the other side. And then we'll grab our 21mm wrench and socket to tighten these down. And then we can repeat that same process on the other side. So now once we have our truck back on the ground, the last thing we have to do is install our new bolt that goes through our track bar. So now we can install our new bolt into our track bar. Now you might have to wiggle your steering wheel back and forth a little bit to get this to go all the way through. So you might want to grab a buddy to hop in the driver's seat to wiggle it for you. And then once we have our bolt through, we can get our nut onto the back side. So now once we have our nut threaded onto the back, we can grab the back side with a 21mm wrench. And then we'll get a 17mm socket on our front side. So that'll wrap up this review and install of the Teraflex 3.5-inch Performance Spacer Lift Kit for your 2020 and newer Jeep Gladiator JT. Thank you for watching, and for all things Gladiator, keep it right here at ExtremeTerrain.com.